Generations of women have been told to endure conditions that medicine failed to investigate. And when thousands of people tell the same story, this is a systemic issue.
You've called diagnostic delay a form of gaslighting, not just medical lag.
I had 13 years when I first had symptoms of endometriosis until I actually heard the word endometriosis. Because we can't get to the bottom of my debilitating pain, I was told like part of being a woman.
How did you get Congress to agree on the Endo Care Act?
The problem is human and not partisan. People in those seats start paying attention when you can put dollars and cents on a problem, and that's how we get things done.
Doctors need to be paid, but people don't need to be selling home to get treatment. What were you able to change on the reimbursement side?
There's one CPT code for endometriosis surgery. It doesn't matter if that surgery is 20 minutes or 8 hours. The surgeon will get reimbursed the same amount. Getting big organizations to changing CPT codes has not been possible.
To the women who are having pelvic pain, what is one thing that you want retired immediately?
Painful periods are not normal, so you deserve it.
The Disruptor podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Views expressed by guests are their own. Consult your healthcare provider before making any medical decisions. Dr. Somi here with a big announcement. I have created a new masterclass with the fabulous Naomi Watts called Sex in Menopause. This program gets into the parts of menopause that nobody talks about. Desire, pain, body image, intimacy. It follows the journeys of 9 real women alongside real evidence-based tools you can use in the bedroom, in your relationships, and at your next doctor's visit. It's free to watch September 9th through the 15th if you sign up now at sexinmenopause.com. That's sexinmenopause.com to watch for free. She spent 13 years trying to get someone to name what was wrong with her own body. One of those took a federal task force. The other one took until she was 29. The lawyer who turned a 13-year diagnosis into a movement and a movement into a budget line. Today's guest is Shannon Cohn, the filmmaker behind Endo What and Below the Belt, the 2 documentaries that more than any others brought storytelling to women's health. Shannon was an international lawyer on the team that prosecuted Enron and an aid worker at the largest Liberian refugee camp in West Africa. She had endometriosis symptoms at 16 and didn't hear the word endometriosis until she was 29. Below the Belt premiered on PBS, executive produced by Hillary Clinton, Senator Orrin Hatch, and Rosaria Dawson. But the part I want today is the one I've never gotten to ask her on a mic. What she's done in Washington for research labs and inside our insurance system. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for doing this. You went from prosecuting one of the biggest corporate fraud cases in history to a refugee camp in Liberia to a film set. What's the kind of invisible thread that you can now see, like looking back at your life, that you couldn't see before?
Yes, I would say at the time, it definitely seemed like a series of left turns, and I suppose it was. But now I would say it feels more like one long investigation of sorts. I would say with Enron and working on that case, for example, it taught me how systems can normalize harm. And really delving into how some of their transactions were structured and could be potentially legal on paper. But even though they were potentially legal, some of them, as we know, some of them were not. They were normalized because it just seemed like, oh, okay, well, everything's on the up and up. Everyone seems so educated. It seems like above everyone's pay grade. I mean, these transactions were so complex, so complicated, but at the end of the day, they were hurting people. Hurting the environment, hurting so many things. So it taught me that. And working in, for example, in Liberia, it also taught me, I would say, that I learned that suffering can become invisible when we accept it as inevitable, as an inevitable part of being in the life, being in the world, in current and modern history. Like, this is where we are, and it's not necessarily inevitable. And the stories I heard and I was witness to were just horrific. And the fact that they almost felt normalized because they were happening in such a large way was really frightening, and something I had never encountered before, living kind of in the West and the global North, when we felt like we didn't necessarily have to deal with issues like that. I would say filmmaking became an investigative tool, a way to look into these systems-wide injustices, this fact that people become invisible. It's a different type of tool that we can look into those themes. And I will say, when I went to film school, I went to NYU, which most people go into narrative film, which means they write scripts and they, make movies with actors, and that's amazing. And I worked on plenty of those sets, and it was fun and interesting and really demanding. But I was always more interested in documentary and nonfiction storytelling because, it's true. I think, truth is stranger than fiction so often. And that's when we can actually get to stories that matter and also create campaigns that could create change into changing injustices. Now that I see the thread weaving through all of those things was never law or, relief work or film. It's about exposing systems that become comfortable with human cost.
And I think that's so powerful with the work that you did in the future. And people say the same thing to me, like, how did you go from daughter who almost watched her mother die at 45, from a system that was, gaslighting and making women invisible and telling them that suffering is not only normalized, but invisible, right? And women became invisible. And then watching that and saying, I'm going to save the world and I'm going to become a doctor. And then that wasn't enough because I was stuck in a system that didn't support big thinkers like me, because they're like, oh, it's always been done this way. I'm like, you can't diagnose and treat a woman in 5 to 7 minutes. And so then I became a founder, and then, did that for a long time, but you're still answering to a board. You're still trying to fix this triangle of patients, providers, and profitability. So then I was like, okay, now it's advocacy and speaking and educating and teaching the next generation of doctors, because people said the same thing. They're like, what? It doesn't make sense. I'm like, but it does. And I feel like life brought some of those things into my path so that I could fix problems in the only way that I knew. But now knowing that about you, it makes so much sense where we met in your life. And so let's talk about this gaslighting that nearly killed my mother. And you've called diagnostic delay a form of gaslighting, not just medical lag. When did this is happening just to me become, wait a second, this is happening to all of us?
It happened the moment that I realized that my experience wasn't unusual. In fact, I was statistically ordinary. And that is when a light, switched for me. Right. Like, this, what's happening, years, I had 13 years before when I first had symptoms of endometriosis until I actually heard the word endometriosis. So 13 years of navigating symptoms, tests, lots of providers. I heard so many things. And it's really disheartening, as you can imagine, when you're 16 years old and you're being told by a trusted provider who actually means well, and is trying to help you. But then, because we can't actually get to the bottom of my GI symptoms, all tests were normal, my debilitating pain, where I was told things like, it's part of being a woman. My own grandmother told me that. She loved me, but that's just, it's that cultural culture of menstrual misinformation where, generations pass on this idea that suffering for women and pain with periods, for example, is normal. And then providers, I had one provider tell me when I was in high school that maybe I was trying to get attention. And I laugh now. I wasn't laughing then, but I laugh now because I remember thinking, I know I'm a teenage girl. I know how to get attention, and I complaining of pain from my private parts, which felt very vulnerable to me.
Yeah, especially
It's
back
not the
then.
way. No, I mean, no, like that never occurred to me that I would ever try to seek attention in that way. And the fact that that was suggested to me, it was really destabilizing in a way where
Mhm.
I felt like, you have a trusted partner in trying to find answers and find a path for healthcare. But then when you're not believed in that way, it's really scary, and it felt really scary. Like I was on my own to try to figure this out. And as a teenager, that's especially scary. So when I realized it wasn't just my story, even though I felt very alone, but as I started having conversations with women, going online, I love that about social media, the good and the bad, but the good is you find communities, for example,
Yes.
and hearing over and over women sharing similar experiences, similar symptoms, and you start seeing those patterns emerging. And when you hear nearly identical stories over and over again, you realize you're not isolated. This is a systemic issue. And when thousands of people tell the same story, that's no longer anecdotal. That's a system, that's infrastructure.
I remember when I watched your film, just sitting in the room crying because I remember I told you afterwards, I was like, Shannon, I see them in flashes. I see them right in those moments where they're seeking out care. So, yes, they're telling me and I believe them. And as a board certified gynecologist, I'm appalled at the diagnostic delay of endometriosis, 10 years, and the debilitating symptoms, like women can't go to work and school and play sports or have sex and have horrific pain during their period. Like I can't imagine anyone seeking attention in this manner. Like most women want to get on and live their lives and not have this horrific pain. But seeing those women and listening to their stories and seeing them in those moments when they're at home and curled up and in pain and struggling, whether it's fertility or not being able to go to work or get their tests covered or their treatments covered, it just tore me apart, even as a healthcare professional, because I've always treated my patients as people, not as numbers or a medical record number. But that's where I think, for me as an entrepreneur, I realized how prolific storytelling is, because to get a bunch of white males to invest in a women's healthcare company to the tune of $40 million, I had to get them to lock on to stories that then were supported with data. And I feel like that's what you did so beautifully. So you could have made just one film and then moved on. So why did you decide that one is not enough and this is not just one story but a strategy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, stories, we all love. I mean, I haven't met anyone that actually doesn't love film, doesn't love story, whether it's true, like fiction or nonfiction. Humans are storytellers by nature. That's how we relate to each other, to our place in the world. So it just made sense that, first of all, a film about endometriosis should be made. And the first one we made, which is educational, is called Endo What? Because literally I would tell people that I'm making a film on endometriosis, and more than half of the time I got an answer. This is over a decade ago, but my answer was Endo what? And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the name of the film, because I can't tell anyone what I'm doing without them going, what? And so as I realized, first we needed a film to inform people about this condition that's so widespread, yet no one seems to know about. I've often said endometriosis is the most common, devastating disease that most people have never heard of. More people have heard of it now. Over the past decade, that's really changed.
And thanks to
But
a lot
still,
of
I
your
think,
work. Let's just say it. Thanks to a lot of your work. I've been in those rooms. Yes.
thank you. But at the same time, I think widespread, maybe they don't quite understand as far as like the suffering or the fact that it actually affects them. Like, I would say everyone listening right now, whether you realize it or not, you you are affected by endometriosis. You either have it or you love someone who has it. We're talking at least 1 in 10 girls and women. Most experts I talk to say that they think it's more like 1 in 4 or 1 in 6. It's just, the diagnostics, they're just not there, you know? So, anyway, that's why I decided, okay, let's make a film. Let's tell a story about it. And as I realized that stopping at information isn't enough, we actually need awareness alone will not shorten the diagnostic delay necessarily. You have to have awareness from so many different points, right? The provider, the patient, the insurance company,
the
everyone.
policymakers, DC,
the policymaker, everyone, right? So to do that, we really needed more than one film. First, Endo is an educational film to give patients a basic knowledge. Second, Below the Belt is a film that really is meant for the masses, for the mainstream, to have everyone, to log into Amazon or Apple or whatever streaming service they have, PBS, and watch the film in a way that they would watch any type of film, and then learn about this condition, learn about the true human cost and care about it. So we have awareness, we have policy reform, we have increasing research dollars, and we've also worked with medical education. So the films are tools for change. They don't just stand alone as entertainment or awareness, but they really are part of a much larger impact campaign. So I would say like awareness without a pathway, it can be a frustration, but we need somewhere for awareness to go, and that's part of that larger campaign.
And that's what I love, is that that's the bar you held yourself to. Not only am I going to tell this story, but I'm going to work on policy, and I'm going to help with research, and I'm going to help with the dollars. And I am going to, like you said, build this pathway, because it's not telling the story is not enough. It's amazing because it gives us awareness. And I think you saw the change between, right, the first 2 films of Endo to by the time you got to Below the Belt, a lot more people knew what endometriosis was. But like you said, there was still so much that needed to be done. So let's take a trip to DC, because when I watched the film, I saw some of the work that you did. How did you get Congress? And we know how hard it is for them to agree on anything. How did you get them to agree on endometriosis and turn that into the Endo Care Act?
Yes. I think in DC, especially right now when things seem so polarized, or anytime really, I think you have to make sure that the problem is human and not partisan, and focus on the fact that pain, crosses political boundaries. Every single congressional district at every state has affected families. We really talk a lot about the economic and workforce implications. That's when people in those seats really start paying attention, when you can put dollars and cents on a problem and really show in your district, this disease is costing your constituents this amount of money, your healthcare system this amount of money. It's putting this burden on your state economy, your district economy, and lost wages, lost productivity, associated medical costs. And when we can actually quantify that for congressional members, I would say, we haven't had anyone who says, oh, that's not important. Oh, we should care about this. What can we do? Like we always have had really positive from across the aisle, the wide spectrum of political beliefs, relating to them as humans and communicating it as a human issue, an economic issue, a shared concern for families and our daughters, our mothers, our sisters, our friends, and really doubling down on the fact that everyone knows someone who's suffering. They may not just know it's endometriosis, but they've suffered with pain, with chronic pain, with infertility. I have to say some of the most heartfelt and emotional conversations I've had on the Hill have had to deal with members who have experienced infertility, themselves personally. And when we have that shared experience and that shared passion for creating change, then we can focus on the things that, we share and have in common rather than the differences. And that's how we can get things done.
So when I sat on one of your panels, I forgot what city, I think we were in Nashville together. I got to meet doctors who are leading some of the charge with research. And I believe they're at Vanderbilt. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, there are some there. Mm-hmm.
So were you building something with them? Were you highlighting them because so many women were coming to you after the film and saying, where do I find an endometriosis expert? Because I'm a board certified OBGYN and I was not trained in excisional surgery, right? I was trained in ablative surgery. Were you doing something with them, or were you highlighting them so the viewers of the film and other people could find experts that they were so desperately in need of?
Yes. Well, with the film, we actually screened it in partnership or at over 30 U.S. medical schools.
Oh, amazing.
That screening in Nashville was in partnership with Vanderbilt Medical School. Yes, highlighting, of course, for local audiences. Hey, these are researchers, these are doctors locally who know about endometriosis, who study endometriosis, who understand endometriosis. And that's one part of the larger impact campaign that I was talking about. As one pillar is medical education. And so part of that is this medical school screening tour that we did. And we screened at every place from Harvard to Yale Yale actually instituted a multidisciplinary program for endometriosis after our screening that we did there. And Yale is also integrated below the belt into their curriculum for physician's assistants. And now we're in discussion, they're going to integrate it for their medical students. I actually co-taught a class of bioethics at Harvard Medical School with Louise Perkins King. She's a real underachiever. You should have her on your podcast. I say that sarcastically. She's an underachiever. She's an MD and a surgeon, an endometriosis surgeon at Mass General Brigham. And she's also a lawyer. Okay. And she teaches bioethics at Harvard. So she teaches at Harvard Law School and Harvard Medical School. She's really quite a powerhouse. So she and I co-taught a class together at Harvard in bioethics where we showed medical students the film, showed them below the belt, and then we broke it down systemically. Things like taboo, stigma, gender bias in medicine, informed consent, structural, institutional barriers to care. And so these are just examples of how we've partnered with medical schools, for example, to really start early to get this education, going and get medical students kind of considering endometriosis and women's health through a different lens. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know, for example, how this would be received. And I remember because the Harvard class was one of the first things that we did. And I had a student come up to me after and she said, listen, she was finishing her first year. She goes, I've learned about so many things this year, so many things, but I will not forget about endometriosis just because of the way that I've learned about it. Because we started here with the heart by sharing a story and letting people have kind of like a passive viewing experience into the lives of people with endometriosis. And then we got into the academic.
No, and so I have goosebumps because Shannon, I have been out, like 20 years. So I always talk about, we never got the sensitivity training. They kind of relied on us to be natural empaths. And some doctors are not. They're think about it, workplace, there's sensitivity training, there's diversity training. We don't get that as doctors. And we're talking about people's most personal aspects of their lives. The most med students back then, we could tell you about the anatomy. We could tell you about the surgery. We could tell you about the workup. And the testing that was available, but the storytelling and the gender bias and the fight, everything that you highlighted for them, they will never forget because they won't forget the stories. And also then you will eradicate the delay in diagnosis because people won't go, oh, it's probably just GI or it's probably nerves or maybe it's, fibroids. They're going to think about endometriosis and it'll be much more quicker in their differential diagnosis than it would have been if they hadn't seen that film. So I love that work so much because you're getting to these clinicians before they're getting out there and starting to practice medicine. So that is Amazing. And I saw some of that magic happening because I learned things about data and research and studies that were going on that I wasn't even aware of. It's easier now with social media to get access to some of that, but still, I didn't realize that. And so I also learned on that panel that you guys were working alongside people who were fighting for reimbursement, because when I saw that people were having to put their homes up for sale and basically go into financial ruin. Now, doctors need to be paid, but people don't need to be selling homes to get treatment. What were you able to change on the reimbursement side, and what is still broken?
Oh, well, this one's a difficult one. Let me tell you. I mean, I'm sure you know, and any provider listening that's to do with CPT coding and all of the things understands. It's like, it is such a huge issue and complex, and honestly, this is the most difficult thing that we've worked on.
Yes.
Because institutional inertia is like, it just, to get systems, large, organizations, professional organizations, the government bureaucracies to move, it is the most difficult thing that I've worked on by far. And the issue, I mean, specifically, which is kind of with endometriosis, but is emblematic, the larger issue with CPT coding, I think, is that with endometriosis there's one CPT code for endometriosis surgery. It doesn't matter if that surgery is 20 minutes or 8 hours. A surgeon will get reimbursed the same amount. And the issue with that is, for a surgeon, it has like a very complex case and they're doing excision surgery, it may take hours.
Yes.
But if you're being reimbursed, like, I think it's like $800, how can you actually afford to keep your lights on and practice? How can you pay your staff? I think it's impossible. So a lot of those physicians have been forced out of network, which then, puts a lot of pressure on them and their practice, but also the patients, because then the patients have to pay out of network. So it's convincing large, sort of bureaucracies to change that system because it's not working, then has been pretty much impossible. You ask what we've been able to accomplish. That is the last thing that's still lagging behind. Medical schools completely, pulling, really embracing the storytelling and what we're having to say. We have a CME program with Mayo. Mayo Clinic has really embraced what we've been doing. They actually show below the belt and training for frontline providers, the Mayo Clinic. But getting these big organizations like ACOG, like the AMA, like CMS, for example, people who have a role to play in changing CPT codes, has not been possible yet.
No, what people don't also realize is that CPT code not only covers the surgery, whether it takes 20 minutes or 8 hours, like you mentioned, it's usually bundling the pre-op visit, which is, 45 minutes to an hour, and 6 weeks of post-operative care. So it doesn't incentivize surgeons other than for the love and passion and for wanting to make a huge difference. But monetarily, it's not incentivizing surgeons to become excisional surgeons. Honestly, it's not why I didn't. The training wasn't offered to me. So, but that's what's so sad about this, and the fact that it's not covered. But I remember you guys were giving women the tools, either like documents, right? Letters that they could just populate with their own information and send in. So kind of taking some of that lift off of the family. So it was like one less thing that they would have to worry about. I remember there was an organization there on the panel that was helping with that. Yeah. And that I think is such a thing of not only kindness, but it will exact change, because women are already, and the family, it affects the whole family. You're going through this surgery, you're bouncing back and forth, you're getting these rejection letters, and you finally get the surgery. It's the last thing you need to be worried about, is trying to be able to afford the care that you deserve so that you can live. I mean, this is quality of life. This is mental health. So many people, I think the other, eyes that were opened with your storytelling is so many people wrongly assume that endometriosis is just a condition of fertility, but it impacts so much more than that. The mental health impacts alone, for being in constant pain and then not being believed by our system, and then when you finally get a diagnosis, for it not to be covered. I mean, and you want to talk about barrier after barrier. And not only have you told the story, you've lived the story. And I'm not sharing anything that you haven't shared on film. So you have endometriosis. Your daughter has endometriosis. And so
Well, my two daughters I have two daughters, and they have a 7 times increased risk. Neither have been diagnosed
okay, so
yet.
neither have been diagnosed.
Okay. But I'm definitely watching them like a hawk. I mean, one's 14 and one's 18. And, I think any mother or parent can identify with the fact that when you worry about your children, anything, any little twinge, any little symptom, you kind of, especially with like genetic mutations, that, like you're on, I feel like I'm in fight or flight mode with them often, just kind of watching and waiting to see. Of course, we try to make different lifestyle choices, eating well and exercise and getting good sleep and things like that, like all of the things that we know we're supposed to do. But it's a really frightening prospect, I think, as parents. And
so you're wearing this dual hat then, because you're fighting this on this professional, level, but then also this deeply personal level, not only with you, but then with this increased risk with your daughters. There is a new test. I'm very involved in femtech and I consult, and I believe it's finally available direct to consumer. I don't know if it's covered or not yet, but it's called the Endom test. Yeah. So I'm excited about the future, and I'm hoping that we can diagnose this without having to put someone through surgery, not only to spare them the years of suffering, but also additional surgeries. I'd rather have them have a curative or a treatment or a therapeutic surgery than a diagnostic. Okay, then we're going to put you on medicine, then we're going to see if it's covered, then we'll try to find an excisional surgeon. I think it'll just shorten that course between symptoms and diagnosis, because you said yours was 13 years, right?
Yes. And it's still quite a long way, but I have to say, like you, I'm excited about where we're going. I think we're going to see accelerated change very soon in diagnostics. I mean, we can go into AI and like large data models and how the possibilities for really recognizing patterns much earlier. We won't have to wait 10 years. I think that's why so many of us now, especially women, are just kind of mad and frustrated, is we see the change coming. We can see answers. We can see progress before the system has realized them. We're aware of what is possible and what is coming. And I think the fact that we are kind of mad about it, really mad about it, and pushing for progress and change, the fact that it will come sooner because we are putting pressure on the systems in place. And I think that's one reason to be very optimistic, though, because the conversations I'm having these days, I hear a lot of the same thing. And I can give a shout out to Gen X, which I am, but man, I have to say, I'm really proud of us at Gen X. We're kind of just getting it done. I have to say,
I agree with you, and we're seeing it in so many verticals in women's healthcare, where we're like, yeah, we are not going to put up with that anymore. But to expand on what you were saying, that is so frustrating for me too. You see this innovation, you see this change, and then you don't see it implemented into systems, right? That's the big lag. And so I always say innovation dies without adoption. And so that's why getting to the providers and making sure they implement it into their clinical workflow and offer it to patients is one of the key steps, especially when we get new diagnostic tools or we get new therapeutics or we have new information, that we should be sharing it with the women who are coming to us with, pelvic pain. And so To the women who are listening who are having pelvic pain, what is one thing that you want retired immediately in 2026?
Oh my gosh. One thing. Painful periods are not normal. Pain that interferes with your day-to-day life, that's not normal. If it keeps you from going on that date, going to work, going to hang out with your friends, participating in sports, that's not normal. So you deserve answers. You deserve for that pain to be addressed, so that you can go on in your life. Yes, pain is out there. It's common, but debilitating pain is not. It's not normal, and you deserve answers. And you deserve to be pain-free and have a fulfilling life.
So you're in front of Congress right now. And if they gave you 60 seconds and a microphone, what are you asking them for? What are you going to say? Because we're all frustrated and a little scared about what's going on with research and data and women's health. So what would you say to them?
I would say that enough's enough. This has gone on too long. Generations of women have spent years being told to endure pain, and to endure conditions that medicine has failed to investigate and take into account sex-based differences and all of the things that we know that it should. That silence is expensive. Delay is expensive. The lack of nuanced targeted treatments is expensive, and working together, we can all do better.
I agree with you. It's going to take all of us from every walk of life to change this healthcare system, particularly for women. So we talked about your medical school work, but what's one mandate in every med school that you want enforceable tomorrow?
I think it's pretty simple. I think every medical student should graduate able to recognize endometriosis, chronic pelvic pain, the way that they recognize diabetes, or heart disease, without going into the fact that they recognize heart disease maybe based on a male model. But every medical student should graduate being able to recognize endometriosis right away.
I love that one. So I'm a forever, I've realized, dreamer, entrepreneur. I didn't know it, when I was going through medical school. And there's always, I joke, people are like, some of you sold 2 companies, like what's next? And is there a pitch deck on your computer? I'm like, always. So you're a storyteller and a prolific one. What's the film you haven't made yet, or the story that's circling in your head that you haven't put out there yet, if you're ready to share?
Sure. I'm in production on a film right now that is exploring the women's health gap told through 4 different conditions. So much as far as like the personal story, like below the belt, like really getting to know women and the people around them, who are struggling with different conditions. And then how they actually all have a role to play in the larger, in the women's health gap. And, I would say in general, I'm drawing increasingly to stories about invisible systems at work. It just so happens to be that there's so much to show and talk about the medical system that I think I'm just going to stay here for a few decades, hopefully, and keep talking about different perspectives about it. Who gets believed, who gets overlooked, structures behind outcomes. So that's what I'm interested in constantly, is circling the stories hiding underneath circling the stories hiding underneath systems, and shining a light on them, and so that we can all understand not only those stories better, but how it affects us in our own lives and our own health.
So we both talked about how we are mothers, and we both have daughters. So, and a lot of our listeners are obviously women and mothers. What's one concrete move that you would recommend to a mother for her daughter for healthcare?
To destigmatize their bodies, their menstrual health, their reproductive health, all of the body parts that they have, so that their daughters understand what the body parts are, what their names are, and understand about that type of education, not being scared to say the word vagina or vulva. Normalize all of that, because if they're not worried or ashamed to say the word, they're much less likely, to not speak up if there's an issue, if there's pain, So normalize talking frankly about our bodies and all the parts of our bodies.
It's so funny that you said those two words, because that's the exact advice I give my daughters. I tell them, I don't want it to be any different when you go to the doctor complaining about an earache or a headache. Then there are problems with your vagina or your vulva. It's a body part. And so if there's an issue, you should be able to discuss it with your clinician without any stigma, taboo, shame. And I really have hope for this next generation, because they're definitely able to have conversations at our dinner table that I wouldn't have dreamed of or felt comfortable, in front of my parents. And they are very comfortable. And so that also keeps me very hopeful for this next generation. And hopefully they won't have to endure a lot of the things that we had to endure.
I think so. And I share your optimism, just for the record, like from my mother's generation to our generation. I was talking about Gen X, but then of course for our children, they're ready. They're ready to have these conversations. They're open. They're excited. I'm excited for them to take the ball and take it even further.
Shannon, the other day I was talking, because they're all home right now, and I couldn't finish my sentence. And my middle one was like, oh, she's always doing that because she's always trying to do too many things at once. And it's like, because I'll be like, blah, 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 and I won't finish the sentence and I'll move down to something else. And my youngest goes, that's because she's menopausal. So I'm like, you're referring to my brain fog? And she was like, yeah. I was like, I didn't know what that was at your age. You're 17, but she called me out on it. I was dying. And then we all started laughing. They're like, no, it's not that. She's not trying to do too much, although I am probably just like you. So where can listeners, what'd you say?
I said, isn't that great though?
Yeah. It led to such a, I always talk about appropriately, like laughter can be sometimes the best medicine. And so it just brought such a moment of levity, and we were cracking up about it because, she's like, oh, mom is always doing that. And she's like, oh, it's just her menopause. So I was like, okay. So where can our listeners watch the films? Can they still bring a screening to their community if they want, or plug into policy work if that's their passion?
Yes. So all of the above. They can watch both Below the Belt and Endo What on platforms around the world. Below the Belt's on Amazon, Apple, Google Play, YouTube, TV. It's been on PBS. Endo What is on the website, endowhat.com. And as far as policy work, there's so many ways to get involved. Hosting a screening, absolutely. It's a really great way to bring this conversation to your local community, state, region, country. We're still doing all of those things and partnering with a lot of great organizations, from grassroots organizations to large global organizations, to have the conversation about women's health, fertility, endometriosis, all of the things. So reach out to us at belowthebelt.film. Find us on social media, and we're here to, be an ally and moving forward. So excited to see what's next for all of us.
Well, thank you for being such a disruptor and for changing the lives of so many women. You've taught me so much, even as a board certified doctor. And I love that we're both optimistic storytellers. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been an honor.
If this gave you the language for a fight you've been having alone, send it to the woman who needs it, the one who's been told it's all in her head. Watch Endo What and Below the Belt and get loud about both. Follow the show and find everything at drsomi.com and at dr.somi-javed on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Your pain is data. Make them count it. Thanks for tuning in to The Disruptor.